All right, so it is the big day that has now finally come after a delay of almost about a year. Tokyo Olympics 2020 kick off this evening with an opening ceremony that is expected to last for almost about 3.5 hours. In the backdrop of the pandemic and also some stiff opposition from the locals and experts who feel that the Olympics event could turn into a sort of a super spreader event. The Tokyo Olympic Games have emerged as one of the most controversial sporting spectacles in recent years. But the organizers insist that everything has in fact been taken into account and there is nothing for people to worry over. So the clock is ticking, and at 8 p.m. later tonight, Tokyo time, or 4:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, the Olympics will kick-start with the opening ceremony. And to give us a mood of what it is like at this point of time in Tokyo and how people are, of course, looking forward to the world's biggest sporting spectacle, we are joined in by our correspondent Phoebe Amoroso, who is joining us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much indeed, Phoebe, for joining us in this broadcast in WION. Now, these Olympics were seen as the Games of Hope when they were awarded in 2013 to Tokyo, and today is there relief in the eyes of the Olympic Committee that despite the many problems, the Games are now finally getting underway.
Yes, sorry, could you repeat that? You broke up.
My question, of course, was, back in 2013, when these games were awarded to Tokyo, these were games that were seen as games of hope. So finally, despite the many controversies and the many challenges in the backdrop of the pandemic, the Olympic Games begin today. So how is this, of course, being looked upon by the Olympic Committee, that they've managed to overcome most of these challenges to get the Games on tonight?
Yes, so there has been, as you mentioned, a lot of controversies over the opening ceremony, which is finally going to be kicking off this evening. It's just been hit by scandals just in the past couple of days. There was a resignation or a dismissal of the creative director of the opening ceremony just yesterday, when it was revealed he'd made some comments about the Holocaust back when he was a comedian in the 1990s. Then there was a composer of the opening ceremony music, and he stepped down before organisers actually dismissed him over, again, inappropriate comments and behaviour back in the past. So the ceremony's been shrouded by all this scandal in the midst of a pandemic, and just yesterday the cases in Tokyo rose to close to 2,000, approaching the highest level which we saw in the second state of emergency here in Tokyo. So unfortunately, the ceremony's really been overshadowed by these issues, and because of the COVID-19 restrictions, the organisers have really had to scale it back. They're estimating at the moment around 950 people will be in attendance. Those will be athletes, officials, and of course journalists. And it's expected that only around 15 dignitaries will be attending, including Francis Macron and also the First Lady Jill Biden. As for how the ceremony is actually going to play out, yet to know, and spectators, of course, have been banned from the Games. There are several fans who are now gathering outside the stadiums. That's the closest they can get to the Games right now, other than watching at home on the TV.
Absolutely, indeed. And also, what's the mood like, amongst the common people? There were some people who were saying that this is not the right time for Japan to, of course, be going ahead with the Olympics, especially considering that the number of cases are on the rise. There is a state of emergency in place. Some people had even suggested that, look, Olympics should not turn into some sort of a super spreader event. So how is the public within Tokyo looking at the Games?
How is the public? Well, the public, I would say, over the past few months, we've seen repeatedly that the majority of people are opposed to the Games. They really feel, as she's mentioned, it's not the right time during a pandemic. Just to kind of recap on Japan's situation, whilst cases of COVID-19 have not been as severe as many other countries, it has a shortage of medical staff and hospital beds for treating those with COVID-19, which means that their system's easily overwhelmed. In fact, back in April, there were cases in the city of Osaka where they had to turn people away. There was just not enough room in the hospitals, and reports of people dying at home. So this is why there's a huge amount of concern over the COVID-19 cases. And in fact, just today, there's been a further 19 cases associated with the Olympic Games being confirmed. That total is now reached 106 since July the 1st. According to the organisers, this represents just a minuscule percentage of the thousands of people who have come into Japan during this time, and it's not seen as a risk. However, many others are disagreeing. There are public health experts such as Kenji Shibuya. He has said that the bubble is really broken, that athletes and officials are going out, there is some mingling with the local population, and that really remains a concern. Then there's also further resentment on the point of the Japanese public in that Tokyo is under its fourth state of emergency. There are restrictions being imposed here on daily life. Restaurants have to close, for example, by 8 p.m, and now alcohol sales have been prohibited. Everyone's being told to stay at home, to not go out, to refrain from contact with others, yet a massive sporting event is taking place. This kind of hypocrisy that many people are calling it, hypocrisy, this contrast, is really grating, and so we've seen a lot of resentment come out on social media, but also even in protests. There were protests outside the Tokyo government buildings earlier this lunchtime, and there will be protests later on outside the opening ceremony. So not the celebratory or festive mood that the organisers have certainly been hoping for and trying to work towards over several years.
Right, that's interesting that there will be protests outside of the stadium during the time of the opening ceremony. Now, speaking about the opening ceremony itself, you're given to understand that it will be a 3.5-hour long opening ceremony. It'll begin at 8 p.m. local time in Tokyo. Give us a sense of what we can expect tonight.
We don't know too many of the details. We do know, for example, that there was some controversy over the first 4 minutes of the music, how they were going to replace that. There are going to be fireworks, there are going to be some very spectacular visuals, but anything such as large-scale choreography, that has been scrapped due to the COVID-19 restrictions. It's going to be very much scaled back, but there are several athletes in attendance, and they will be looking forward to taking part in what they can do in what's going to be a very scaled down and what's been described as a muted event.
Right, now in the event, because we've already seen a few infections within the Olympic Village, but in the event there is a bigger outbreak of infections, is the health system within Tokyo, prepared to actually take on more infections if they were to happen?
If there is a bigger outbreak, well, of course, the organisers have to plan for all kinds of contingencies. And indeed, the Muto, who is the CEO of the Tokyo organisers, caused some controversy or stir earlier this week in that he said that if cases did rise, they would undertake further talks between all involved parties. And this led to headlines saying that, okay, maybe the organisers are even considering a last-minute cancellation. I don't think that's on the cards. I mean, they've put together over the past few months several rules and protocols. There are playbooks which list the rules and regulations. There are apps for tracking and tracing and monitoring health. The biggest concern is if there would be an outbreak inside the Olympic Village. This could then derail the whole Games because there will be many people disqualified from competing. There is some lack of clarity over what will happen if an athlete does get confirmed positive, for example, whether they will be allowed to compete if they then there's enough time for them to test negative. So there are many factors up in the air. Of course, the organisers are hoping that this does not spread beyond that, but there are warnings from several health experts that say that there is a risk not just within Tokyo of cases spreading, but of athletes and officials returning to their home countries and infections spreading out from there. So this could have global ramifications, is what several voices are saying.
Absolutely, indeed. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Phoebe Amoroso, for joining us from Tokyo and getting us all the updates there. This, of course, is the big day in Tokyo. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.